Hello, and welcome to another short lecture in COMM 1500 Interpersonal Communication. So in the last lecture we talked about how communication, interpersonal communication specifically, satisfies a variety of needs. And in this lecture, this mini lecture, I want to talk to you about the process of communication. So the first thing that we have to do, of course, is to define communication. And as your book tells us, communication is about using messages to generate meanings. So this is in a way an obvious kind of definition, but it has more meaning if you dig into it. So communication is about using messages to generate meanings. So what's important about this, in part, is the idea the idea of the generation of meaning. Now this obviously takes place in the mind of the person who receives the message. That's where meaning is made. So I want you to remember this as we move forward and we talk about some of the models that we've developed to exemplify communication over time. All right, so one of the most foundational models, one of the earliest models of communication that we had is what we call the linear communication model. So according to this model, the idea is there's a sender, the person who's sending the message, and he or she puts her messages usually into words if they're speaking or writing. They send that message through what's called a channel. So the channel could be a book if we're writing. It could be just their voice in the air if we're talking face to face. The channel in this case, in this short lecture, is a YouTube video. And they send their message over this channel till it gets to the receiver, the person who's receiving the message. And he or she then decodes this message. That means they make sense of it. So this seems, in a way, how communication works, right? I mean, this seems like how we think about communication oftentimes. But I suggest to you there's something missing here. There's a problem with this. In a really simple, dumbed-down version of the linear model, this is what it looks like. There's a sender who sends a message, and then someone receives it. But we all know that communication doesn't really work this way. If it did, then it would just be as simple as sending out a message, and the person would receive it exactly as you intended them to. There would never be any confusion. There would never be any misinterpretation. It would be a really simple process. But that's not really how things work. So as a result, more recently, people in the communication field have come up with this idea of a transactional model of communication. And this is different in a lot of ways. So we still have a sender. We still have a message that goes out over a channel. And remember, the channel, again, could be something like television, just a voice, writing, and someone who receives the message. But some important distinctions. The first thing is that we need to think about where people are coming from. Where is the sender coming from? What kind of field of experience do they have? This is a fancy phrase for where are they coming from. We're all made up of a series of experiences over the course of our lifetime. And I'm very different in my history than you, in all likelihood. So as a result, the way I send messages is influenced by my past, by my history, by everything that's happened to me, by my socioeconomic status, by my education, by who my parents were, by who my friends were, by where I went to college, by where I went to elementary school. I mean, everything that's ever happened to me figures into this field of experience. And that's true for the receiver as well. So we're both coming from different places. So this transactional model allows for that. It allows for the kinds of differences that people have. It also allows for what's called feedback. So we all know that when we talk to somebody, they provide feedback. They might make a face, they might say something, their body language provides feedback. People are constantly providing feedback, and that changes the messages we want to send. You might start saying something to your boyfriend or girlfriend, and they get an angry look on their face. Well, you're probably going to stop with that particular message and think about a different way to say it. That's what feedback does. So the transactional model allows for feedback. It allows for what we call simultaneous sending and receiving. So you're sending a message, and while you're sending it, you're receiving feedback at the same time. You're watching somebody's face. You're paying attention to what they say, whether or not they nod their head or shake their head no, or if they don't seem like they're receptive to your message. So we're sending and receiving at the same time, and we're receiving and sending at the same time. So ultimately, the big difference here is that a transactional model of communication imagines communication as something you do with someone. The linear model presents communication as something you do to someone. Sort of like what I'm doing now with this short lecture. So what jams our messages? What makes it so that sometimes messages don't get through? Anything that jams a message is known as noise. Now, when we use the term noise in communication, we don't mean literally noise, although sometimes it can be. That's just our term for anything that prevents the message from getting through clearly. And there are different types of noise. The three major kinds that we talk about in this class are external noise. That might be something like a jackhammer, or even smoke. You can't see the message because there's too much smoke. You can't hear what the person's saying because someone's jackhammering outside. I teach in classrooms where it seems like people cut the grass outside every day, and it makes it hard for my students to hear me. That's external noise. Sometimes there's physiological noise. Physiological is a fancy word for physical. So if you're sick in class, let's say, God forbid, you have the coronavirus, and you're feeling terrible, you might not hear what I'm saying to you. You might be really tired. Maybe you stayed up all night cramming for a test. And then you go to a lecture, and you're there, but you don't really hear anything. That's physiological noise. Hunger. We know that students who are too hungry can't learn. That's one of the reasons why we have the food pantry at the college. Then finally, we talk about psychological noise. Psychological noise might be something like stress. Oh, I'm so stressed out I can't even listen. Maybe mental illness. Maybe you're depressed or schizophrenic. These things would definitely hamper your ability to understand someone's message clearly. So these are all factors, again, that can influence the way messages are received. And they can prevent that message from getting through. Anything that prevents that message from getting through is noise. So we define communication. Let's define interpersonal communication. Now that we know about the transactional model, we can say that interpersonal communication is a transactional process involving participants who occupy different but overlapping environments and create meaning in relationships through the exchange of messages, many of which are affected by external, physiological, and psychological noise. So again, it's a transactional process. It's a give and take. We occupy different but overlapping environments. What that means is that we come from different places, but for that short time where we're communicating, our environments overlap. We're there together. And we create meaning and our personal relationships by exchanging messages, and sometimes these messages are hard to understand because of external factors, physical factors, and psychological factors. All right. That's it for this short lecture. Thanks for tuning in.